I want to start today by asking you to visualize a disaster scene. And I don't mean a Hollywood set. I mean, really try to put yourself in the headspace of a catastrophe.
Right. I'm picturing it.
It's January 15th, 1919. We are in Boston, specifically the North End. It's lunchtime.
Mm.
The streets are busy, commercial wagons, people on break. And the weather is, well, it's weird. It's unseasonably warm.
Right. For Boston in January.
It's 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which in a Boston January feels, like a heat wave. People have their windows cracked open. It feels deceptively safe.
That false sense of security is always the prelude, isn't it? The calm before.
Exactly. And then the soundscape changes. It's not an explosion initially. It's not a siren.
So what did people hear?
Witnesses described a low rumble, a grinding sound coming from the earth itself, and then this terrifying rhythmic noise, rat-tat-tat.
Like a machine gun.
That is exactly what people thought it was. You have to remember, World War I had just ended a few months prior. Veterans and civilians alike knew that sound. They thought they were under attack.
It creates this immediate psychological panic. The war has come home.
But it wasn't gunfire. Those bullets were steel rivets shooting out of a massive industrial tank at high velocity. And what followed wasn't fire, and it wasn't water.
No.
It was a wave initially 25 to 40 feet high, moving at 35 miles per hour of molasses.
And this is the moment where we have to pause. Because I can see the look on your face.
It's the giggle factor, right?
Yeah.
I admit, when I first saw this topic in our stack, the Boston molasses disaster, my brain went straight to cartoons.
Of course.
It sounds like something from Cloudy with a chance of meatballs. You hear molasses and you think of grandmothers and gingerbread cookies. You think, how bad could that be? It's just syrup.
That reaction is the single biggest barrier to understanding this event. The giggle factor has sort of immunized us to the horror of it. Because if I told you a wave of concrete or a wave of boiling tar hit a city, you wouldn't smile. Yeah. But because it smells like sugar, history has often treated this like a quirky footnote or a blooper reel.
So let's be clear right up front. This wasn't a sticky inconvenience.
No, it was a massacre. This was a dark, violent tide that crushed buildings, killed 21 people in horrific ways, injured 150 more, and flattened an entire neighborhood.
Wow.
It is a story of corporate negligence, of the military-industrial complex, and of physics gone wrong.
That is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to strip away the absurdity of the substance.
We have to.
We need to unpack the physics. Why was a sugary syrup deadly enough to knock a firehouse off its foundation? We need to look at the political pressures, the war and prohibition that filled that tank, and we need to see how the legal battle afterwards effectively invented modern engineering ethics.
It's a classic case of regulations being written in blood, or in this case, molasses.
So let's get into it. We need to set the scene properly. You mentioned the North End in 1919. If I go there today, I'm waiting in line for a cannoli at Mike's Pastry. It's a tourist hub. Was it like that then?
Far from it. In 1919, the North End was the most densely populated neighborhood in Boston and arguably one of the most densely populated square miles in the entire United States.
I was looking at the census data in the notes. 40,000 people in 1 square mile. That's claustrophobic. That's tenement living on steroids.
It was teeming. And we have to talk about the demographics because they explain why this disaster was allowed to happen.
Okay.
It was predominantly Italian immigrants, about 98% of the population. These were families trying to make a new life. Many were not citizens yet. Many didn't speak fluent English.
Which usually translates to, we have zero political power.
Precisely. They had very little voice in City Hall. They had no advocacy. So you have this incredibly dense residential neighborhood, but it was mixed right in with heavy industry.
It's the classic zoning nightmare.
Right on Commercial Street, you had the shipping docks, you had the stables for the Teamsters, and you had the elevated railway, the L rumbling overhead constantly.
So just a constant noise.
It was loud, it was dirty, and it was crowded. And towering over all of it, right next to where people slept and children played, was this tank.
Okay, let's talk about the substance itself. Why on earth did Boston need 2.3 million gallons of molasses? I know Boston has a history with beans and brown bread, but that's a lot of beans.
It wasn't for beans. To understand the tank, you have to understand the economy of the time. Molasses is the residue from boiling sugarcane. Boston had been a hub for this for centuries, going back to the triangular trade.
The colonial history, sugar, rum, and slavery.
Exactly. Ships took rum to Africa, traded for enslaved people, took them to the Caribbean to grow sugar, and brought the molasses back to New England to make more rum.
Right.
Now, by 1919, the slave trade had been abolished in Massachusetts for a long time, but the infrastructure for processing molasses remained.
But you found a twist in the research. This wasn't just about making rum for drinking, was it?
No. And this is the part people forget. This connects directly to World War I. The tank was owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, USIA, and its subsidiary, Purity Distilling.
Industrial alcohol. That sounds less tasty.
When you distill molasses, you get industrial alcohol. And do you know what industrial alcohol was essential for in 1918?
I have a feeling it's not for sterilizing cuts.
Munitions, explosives, smokeless powder. The British and American armies needed massive quantities of industrial alcohol to manufacture the bombs and artillery shells used in the trenches of France.
So this tank wasn't a bakery supply.
No, it was part of the war machine. USIA was making a fortune supplying the war effort.
So we have a tank built to supply the war. But the war ended in November 1918. The armistice was signed. Why was the tank full to the brim in January 1919?
That is where the other historical pressure cooker comes in. You have the war ending, but you have another date looming on the calendar, January 16th, 1920.
The 18th Amendment. Prohibition. The clock was ticking. They knew that in exactly 1 year, the sale of alcohol for beverage purposes would be illegal. So USIA and Purity Distilling were pivoting.
They were racing to distill as much rum and industrial alcohol as possible before the ban took effect.
It was a fire sale, a production sprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wanted to turn every drop of molasses into a saleable product before the window closed.
So that explains it.
That is why, just 2 days before the disaster, a ship called the Millie Hero arrived from the Caribbean. It pumped over 500,000 gallons of fresh, warm molasses into the tank.
Topping it off.
To the very brim, 2.3 million gallons. They were maximizing capacity to maximize profit.
So you have a tank that was rushed into service for the war, now being pushed to its absolute limit for a prohibition cash grab, sitting in a neighborhood of immigrants who can't complain about it. That is a recipe for disaster.
It is. But the real culprit, the true villain of the story, is the tank itself. Or rather, the lack of engineering behind it.
Let's unpack the villain. This wasn't just a bucket, it was huge.
He was a monster. 50 feet tall, 90 feet in diameter. Picture a 5-story building made of steel filled with liquid. But the problem wasn't the size, it was the incompetence.
The notes mention a man named Arthur Jell.
Arthur Jell. He is a central character here. He was the treasurer of USIA.
Wait, the treasurer, not the chief engineer.
He was a finance guy, an accountant. He had absolutely no technical training in architecture or engineering.
Oh, that's not good.
But the company put him in charge of the project in 1915 because they wanted it done fast and they wanted it done cheap.
That is terrifying. Putting the budget guy in charge of structural integrity.
And he acted exactly like a budget guy. He didn't hire a structural engineer to design the tank. He didn't hire an architect to sign off on the plans.
What?
He literally looked at some specs, picked a spot, and said, build it.
How is that even legal? You can't just build a skyscraper without an architect.
The regulations in 1915 were looser, but Jell also exploited the loophole. He classified the tank as a receptacle.
A receptacle.
Like a giant trash can.
Yeah.
He argued that because people wouldn't be living inside it, it didn't need the rigorous inspections of a building.
So he sidestepped the safety checks on a technicality.
And he cut corners on the materials. Let's talk about hoop stress.
Okay, lay some physics on me. Hoop stress.
Imagine a wooden barrel held together by metal hoops. The liquid inside pushes outward against the walls.
Right.
That creates tension in the ring. That's hoop stress. To handle that tension, the steel walls need to be a certain thickness.
And I'm guessing Jell didn't splurge on the thick steel.
Based on forensic analysis done years later, the steel at the bottom of the tank, where the pressure is the highest, was only about 0.66 to 0.75 inches thick.
Is that bad? I don't have a frame of reference.
It's critically thin. For a tank of that diameter holding liquid that heavy, it was woefully under-engineered.
How much heavier is molasses than water?
About 50% heavier. The steel was brittle, and the rivets.
Machine gun bullets?
They used a lap joint construction. Imagine taking 2 sheets of paper, overlapping the edges, and sticking a pin through them. That's a lap joint.
Okay.
When you pull that, the pin wants to twist. It creates eccentric loading that's much weaker than a butt joint where the plates are flush and reinforced.
So the tank was basically holding itself together by sheer luck.
Luck and a very low factor of safety. In engineering, you usually build things to hold 2 or 3 times the expected load.
Right, for redundancy.
This tank's factor of safety was barely over 1. It was living on the edge from day 1.
And the crazy thing is, the neighborhood knew it. The tank wasn't subtle.
No, it was a neighborhood character.
Yeah.
A bad one. It leaked constantly. The seams were so core that molasses would weep out of the sides.
I read about the kids. That image really stuck with me.
That's a haunting detail.
Yeah.
The local children, kids like Pasquale and Helska, would bring little pails or sticks to the base of the tank to collect the oozing molasses.
Like a free candy dispenser.
It was. It sounds like a fairy tale, but in a grim way.
And it wasn't just leaks. The tank groaned. Physically groaned. People reported that when the tank was full, the metal would shudder and rumble. You could hear the bolts screaming under the tension.
So USIA knew. You can't miss a 50-foot groaning tank leaking syrup into the street. Did they try to fix it?
This is the detail that makes you want to scream. They did fix it.
Okay.
They painted the tank brown.
They painted it brown to match the molasses?
Exactly. To camouflage the leaks so the public and the city inspectors wouldn't see the sticky streaks running down the side.
So it was a cosmetic cover-up.
It was a cover-up. They prioritized the appearance of safety over actual structural integrity.
That's just...
Villainous.
It's villainous. There's no other word for it.
So you have a tank built by an accountant, leaking, groaning, painted brown to hide the evidence, and filled to the absolute brim. It's January 15th. What happens at 12:40 p.m.?
It's the perfect storm of physics. Several factors converged. First, fermentation. The molasses generates carbon dioxide as it sits, building internal pressure like a shaken soda can.
And then the temperature? You mentioned that.
The thermal shock. This is crucial. The air was 45 degrees warm for winter, but still cool. But the molasses that had just been delivered
from the Caribbean.
Came from the Caribbean is likely 70 or 80 degrees.
So you have warm liquid dumping into a cold steel tank.
And then the outside air warms up rapidly. You have thermal expansion of the molasses, thermal expansion of the gas, and a brittle steel shell that can't stretch. The hoop stress exceeded the tensile strength of the rivets.
And that's when Officer Frank McManus sees it?
He was at a police call box nearby. He witnesses the moment of failure. The tank didn't just crack. It disintegrated.
Wow.
The rivets sheared off that rat-tat-tat sound, and the steel panels peeled open like a banana skin.
And 2.3 million gallons of liquid are suddenly liberated.
12,000 tons. That's the weight. 12,000 tons of fluid dropped instantly.
I want to really dig into the physics of this wave. Because when I hear molasses flood, I picture a slow ooze, like, oh no, my shoes are sticky.
That's the mistake.
Yeah.
This is where we need to talk about potential versus kinetic energy.
Oh, okay.
You have a stack of liquid 50 feet high. That is massive potential energy held in check by the walls. When the walls vanish, gravity takes over instantly.
It all converts.
That potential energy converts to kinetic energy motion.
The sources say the wave was initially 25 to 40 feet high.
Yes. Imagine a tsunami, but instead of water, it's a substance 50% denser than water. A cubic foot of water weighs about 62 pounds. A cubic foot of molasses weighs nearly 90 pounds.
So getting hit by this wave isn't like getting hit by a wave at the beach.
It's like getting hit by a mudslide or a rock fall. The momentum is enormous.
And the speed?
It was moving at 35 miles per hour. You cannot run 35 miles per hour.
And it didn't just flow around obstacles, it went through them.
It smashed them. The elevated railway, the L, was held up by massive steel trestles. The wave hit them and twisted the girders like pretzels. It knocked a train car off the tracks.
And the buildings?
Wood frame buildings stood no chance. The Claverty house, which was right next to the tank, Bridget Claverty was inside. The waves tore the house off its foundation and smashed it against the L structure. It splintered instantly.
And Firehouse number 31. This was a brick building, right? A sturdy municipal building.
Sturdy? Yes. But the wave hit it with such force that it knocked the entire firehouse off its foundation. The structural supports failed, and the second floor collapsed, pancaked onto the first floor.
The firefighters were inside.
They were on their lunch break. They were trapped in the wreckage, pinned under tons of debris and rising molasses.
This brings us to the most horrifying part of the physics, the fluid dynamics. Because escaping this wasn't like swimming out of a flood.
No. And this is where a study done by Harvard and the American Physical Society a few years ago really sheds light on the tragedy.
Okay.
They analyzed the behavior of molasses as a non-Newtonian fluid.
Okay, non-Newtonian. I've heard the term. It means it doesn't behave like water.
Right. Water has a constant viscosity. Molasses is a shear thinning fluid.
Shear thinning.
That means its viscosity changes depending on the stress applied to it. When the wave exploded, it was moving at 35 miles per hour. The high shear stress made it flow relatively easily. It was liquid.
But then it stopped.
It stopped, and then the temperature trap snapped shut.
Huh.
This is the key. The molasses was warm, but it spread out over the freezing cold cobblestones of Commercial Street. The surface area was massive. It cooled down instantly.
And what happens to molasses when it gets cold?
It gets thick. The Harvard study showed that as the molasses cooled from roughly 10 degrees C to 0 degrees C, its viscosity increased by a factor of 3.
So it's turning into cement in real time.
Exactly. It created a quicksand effect. As people struggled to get out, the fluid was cooling and thickening around them.
Oh, that's horrible.
The more they fought, the deeper they sank, and the harder the substance became to move through.
That is the stuff of nightmares.
One rescuer described it as a tsunami of lava that turns into rock. If you were knocked down, you were essentially encased in amber. You couldn't breathe. You couldn't move your limbs.
We have to talk about the victims. We mentioned 21 people died, but we need to remember they weren't just statistics.
No, they were neighbors. We mentioned Pasquale Antosca and Maria D'Estasio.
The kids collecting firewood.
They were 10 years old. They were just playing. They were right in the blast zone and stood no chance.
And George Leahy, the firefighter.
George Leahy's story is heartbreaking. He was a hero in the department. He had just gone to the second floor of the firehouse to rest. When the building pancaked, he was pinned in a crawl space, about 18 inches high. He was alive after the collapse.
But the molasses was rising.
The men below could hear him. They tried to get to him, but the molasses filled the crawl space and he drowned before they could cut through the floorboards.
Oh, my God.
It was a slow, terrifying death.
And the horses. The North End was a hub for Teamsters, so there were horses everywhere. The descriptions in the sources they're hard to read.
They are graphic. Horses are top-heavy animals. When the wave hit, they were knocked down. And because of that sticky quicksand effect, they couldn't get back up. The sources say they died like flies on sticky flypaper.
The police had to intervene.
They did. The police couldn't pull the horses out. The suction was too strong. They had to go around and shoot the horses to end their suffering. It was a chaotic, gruesome scene.
Let's talk about the rescue effort. Who responds to something like this? The ambulances couldn't get through the sludge.
The first organized responders were actually cadets from the USS Nantucket.
A training ship.
Yes, it was docked nearby. About 116 cadets saw the explosion and ran toward the disaster.
But what could they do? You're wading waist-deep in opaque goo.
That's the problem. Molasses is opaque. You can't see through it. So rescuers were stepping into open manholes, tripping over debris, stepping on bodies they couldn't see, and everything was slippery.
You try to grab someone's arm to pull them out, and your hand just slides off?
Exactly. They had to wipe the molasses off faces just so people could breathe. It coated their eyes, their noses, their mouths. It was total sensory confusion.
I have to mention the banana salesman. Amidst all this horror, there's this one detail that highlights the sheer volume of the mess.
Yes, a shop owner across the street. He didn't trust banks, so he had his life savings, about $4,000 hidden in the basement of his shop.
Which was now filled with molasses.
Filled to the ceiling, 12 feet deep. It took him weeks of digging through the hardening sludge to find his money.
Wow.
It just shows you how the fluid penetrated every single crack and crevice of the neighborhood.
So the rescue turns into recovery, and then recovery turns into cleanup. How do you clean up a city coated in 2.3 million gallons of syrup?
Not easily. Their first instinct was to use fire hoses, just blast it away.
Seems logical.
But it failed. Fresh water just skidded over the top of the molasses. It didn't dissolve it fast enough. They tried scrapers, shovels. It was just too sticky.
So what was the solution?
Chemistry. Someone realized that salt cuts sugar. So the fireboats pumped brine salt water directly from Boston Harbor.
Millions of gallons of salt water.
They blasted the streets with brine. The salt water broke down the chemical bonds of the molasses enough to wash it into the gutters and eventually into the harbor.
Which must have turned the harbor into a mess.
The harbor was brown until the following summer. But the mess didn't stay in the North End. This is the migration of the disaster.
It tracked everywhere.
Everywhere. Thousands of sightseers came to look. Rescue workers went home. They all had molasses on their boots, their clothes. It got onto the streetcar seats. It got onto the subway platforms. People in the suburbs, miles away, were finding molasses on their carpets because it had been tracked in on shoes. The whole city was sticky.
Which brings us to the aftermath, the legal battle. Because in 1919, companies didn't usually just roll over and pay up.
No, this launched what is arguably one of the most significant legal battles in Massachusetts history. You had 119 separate lawsuits filed by victims and families.
And the courts did something novel here. They consolidated them.
They combined them into a massive class action style case. It was the only way to manage it. But USIA wasn't going to admit fault. They came out swinging with a defense strategy that was very much a product of its time.
Let me guess. They didn't say, our accountant built a bad tank.
No. They said, terrorists blew it up.
Terrorists.
Specifically, anarchists. You have to understand the context. 1919 was the height of the first Red Scare. There had been a series of bombings in U.S. cities by a group called the Gallianists Italian anarchists.
So they used the ethnicity of the neighborhood against the victims.
It was a cynical, strategic move. They claimed that evildoers planted a bomb to destroy the tank because it was supplying the U.S. military.
Wow.
They played on the anti-Italian sentiment and the fear of radicalism.
It's a convenient narrative. It wasn't our cheap steel. It was those dangerous radicals.
And many people believed it. It was a plausible story in 1919.
So how did the plaintiffs fight back? How do you prove a negative that there wasn't a bomb?
This is where history was made. The trial lasted 5 years and involved over 1,000 witnesses.
1,000.
But the plaintiff's attorney, a man named Damon Hall, did something revolutionary. He relied on expert witnesses.
This wasn't standard practice.
Not to this extent. Hall brought in metallurgists from MIT, he brought in civil engineers, he brought in architects. They treated the wreckage like a crime scene.
CSI, Boston 1919.
Exactly. They analyzed the grain structure of the steel under microscopes. They looked at the rivets, and they proved, scientifically, that the rivets didn't shear because of an explosion.
How could they tell?
An explosion's fast and sharp, it leaves specific markings. These rivets showed signs of fatigue and overstress. They had been pulled apart slowly over time until they snapped.
So the tank burst from the inside out.
Due to pressure, not from a shockwave.
So it was science versus scapegoating.
And science won. In 1925, the court-appointed auditor, Hugh Ogden, released his report. It was scathing. He ruled that USIA was liable. He stated explicitly that there was no bomb. The tank failed because of structural weakness and negligence.
That must have been a huge vindication for the neighborhood.
It was. It was a statement that the company couldn't just blame the immigrants for their own incompetence. USIA settled for $628,000.
Which is, what, roughly $10 million today?
Yeah, roughly $9 to $12 million. It wasn't a company-killing amount, but it was significant. But the money wasn't the real legacy.
The legacy is what we see when we walk down the street today.
Correct. The deep dive takeaway here is about engineering ethics. Before this disaster, the idea of professional responsibility for engineers was vague.
It was buyer beware.
Right. But because of the molasses flood, states began to adopt strict laws. They required that plans for major structures be stamped by a licensed professional engineer, a PE.
So when I see that stamp on a blueprint, that seal
means a qualified human being has reviewed the math and is taking personal legal responsibility for the safety of that structure.
Wow.
It means an accountant can't just sketch a tank on a napkin and build it.
It effectively outlawed the Arthur Jells of the world.
It did. It codified the idea that engineering is a public trust. If you build something that can kill people, you have a duty to the public that outweighs your duty to your employer's profit margin.
That is profound. We often complain about bureaucracy, permits, inspections, codes, but this story reminds us that those codes aren't there to be annoying. They are there because 21 people drowned in molasses.
Regulations are the immune system of a society. They develop in response to trauma.
Before we wrap up, we have to talk about the folklore. Because if you talk to anyone who grew up in the North End, they will tell you about the smell.
It is the most enduring legend of the flood. The story goes that on hot, humid summer days, the sweet, sickly scent of molasses still rises up from the cobblestones in the basements.
Is there any science to that? Or is it just the power of suggestion?
Scientifically, it's highly unlikely that any residue remains 100 years later. We've paved the streets, we've rebuilt the sewers, but culturally, it's very real.
I read a quote from a local resident, Nick Labonte. He swore he could smell it.
It's a sensory memory that has been passed down. It's a way for the neighborhood to say, we remember. It's a ghost story that keeps the memory of the victims alive.
And if you go there today, is there a monument? A statue of the wave?
Surprisingly, no. For decades, there was nothing. The city just wanted to move on. Now, there is a small green plaque in Pupolo Park near the Bosch Courts on Commercial Street.
That's it, a plaque.
It's easy to miss. You have to hunt for it. And I think that speaks to the nature of the event. It's not a war victory. It's not a moment of civic pride like the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
It was a gruesome, preventable industrial slaughter. It's a star on the city, not a trophy.
It is a sobering thought. We started this episode talking about the Giggle Factor, about how funny a molasses flood sounds. But when you actually dive into it,
It stops being funny.
it becomes a story about greed, about war, about how we treat vulnerable communities and about the physics of failure.
And it reminds us that safety is a choice we have to keep making every single day.
So the next time you see a construction site or see a stamped set of plans or even just bake some gingerbread cookies, take a second to remember the North End in 1919, remember Pasquale and Maria, remember the dark tide.
Well said.
Thank you for guiding us through this. This was heavy but necessary.
My pleasure. Stay curious.
And thanks to you for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll be back next time with another story that is much more than it seems.